Welcome to Vita Ministry. I'm Cassandra Barbato, your host. Let's take just a few minutes to be nourished on God's Word. They are hot mad. They are following him with violence, that they actually had to carry Paul. Yes, the soldiers had to carry him because of the violence of the mob, and the multitudes of people are shouting, "Away with him." All right, so let's look at a couple of verses in Romans. See, Romans, Paul is the writer, and he walks us through step by step the condition of mankind, salvation through Christ, and then he starts to address things from his own people, right? So in chapter 10 of Romans, he's going to tell us his heart about these people, the ones who are shouting away with him, the ones who were trying to kill him, that are so violent that the soldiers had to pick him up and carry him off. He says this in chapter 10, it says, "Brothers and sisters, my heart's desire and my prayer to God for them is for their salvation." This is Paul talking about those who are of the Jews, the ones who are persecuting him. "For I testify about them that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. For not knowing about God's righteousness." Ooh, that's interesting, huh? Didn't they get the 10 Commandments? Didn't they get the whole of God's law? His righteous and just law? But Paul says, for not knowing about God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. So Paul, his heart is for their salvation. And he's explaining that they don't know about God's righteousness. See, God's righteousness you can't attain by your effort. You cannot be righteous in your behavior to the level of what is really righteousness. You might have some good days. You might have some good points. You might even have some strengths in your personality, things that you happen to be kind of good at most of the time. But the fact is that you can't be righteous in your behavior. You cannot. And one righteous act does not make you righteous. Does that make sense? Righteousness has to do with perfection. It is perfect. And they did not know that righteousness, the righteousness of God, is given as a gift. And instead, they were seeking to establish their own righteousness before God. In other words, they were seeking to live up to standards in order to show that they can be accepted by God because they did good enough on their own. Same thing's going on today. It doesn't matter if you're using God's law or a law of your own making, if you are coming before God, or even commandments under the New Testament, under the New Covenant, things that are commanded to the believer, if you think that those things are what make you right with your God, you have now fallen from grace. You've stepped out of that favor. Yes, they did not subject themselves to the righteousness of God. Subject yourself today, believer, to the righteousness of God. How do you do that? How do you subject yourself to God, to the righteousness that is found in him? Well, he says, for Christ is the end of the law for righteousness. Christ is the end of you trying to be good before your God in your behavior in order to be accepted by him. Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes. If you are willing to believe, then righteousness by law is of no effect to you. What you have is a gift of righteousness. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let me encourage you to share this episode with the people in your life so they can get that nourishment of God's Word. And hey, did you know that Vita Ministry is a 5-minute excerpt taken from my main podcast, Your Daily Meds? You can hear more at yourdailymeds.org.